Welcome to the Lance Wallnau Show. Today, there's no end of things that could just frustrate you, and then this is part of my mental discipline every day is to try to find out what is worthy of exasperation in the moment. And I think that as a Christian, we've got to kind of condition ourselves to know that the Bible says that in the last days, the tares and the wheat are going to be wrestling with each other. So that means you're going to be in a constant close proximity with crazy people who are animated by spiritual forces they themselves don't even understand. And that can wear you out unless you can find, I'm thinking for like relief, I'm ready to do a Relief Factor commercial, but I'm not ready, I don't have the product yet. I want to do my Relief Factor as Jason Mattera. Sometimes you have to find somebody who's writing something that says exactly what you want to say, and it's like, yeah, there you go. And then you click and send it, or you interview them. Jason, thanks for joining me today. You are the Relief Factor for us in the cultural conflict.
Oh, I appreciate that, Lance. At least I'm doing something right. But thank you for having me on.
You are. You're kind of like a James O'Keefe type that doesn't get in trouble with everybody, which is like an art in itself. So, Jason, you're like a New York Times bestselling author, which is an achievement if you can do it once. But you did it with these in-your-face type capitalism, liberals who make millions of dollars swiping your tax dollars. Not surprisingly, Mark Levin said it was outstanding. Hollywood hypocrites, the devastating truth about Obama's biggest backers, and Obama's zombies, which was your first book, I believe, How the Liberal Machine Brainwashed Your Generation. Now, so you obviously you've got a bead on this thing. You see, it's kind of like Rush used to have. Rush had a grid, and he put that grid on. It's like those eyeglasses, He could see what was going to come and what game was being played. As many of us were kind of like thinking, how does he know this stuff? Well, there's always a pattern to it. And you picked up on a pattern recently. I want to start with the article that you wrote. I was surprised at how this bothered me. Fat liberationists. Would you please explain to our audience what are fat people up to these days that we need to know about?
What are the fat people? And I would preface it. I think if we're all honest with each other, we can all lose a few pounds for sure. So I'm making fun of fat people or people who have trouble losing weight for sure. But we at least recognize that there is some deleterious consequences when we have undisciplined eating habits, at least over the long haul. And what we know with the left, and we know with wokeism in general, is what they try to do is have narratives run in these oppression sequences, right? So it's never on, is this true or not? It's always, well, is this narrative or is this instance oppressing one group over another? And usually it started out with, rich versus poor. It segued into black versus white. And then the left started saying, over the past few decades, well, they intersect many of these groups. And that's where they got the concept of intersectionality, where they have this victimization bowl of soup and they throw everything in they possibly can. And it's to make America appear more sinful, more racist, more mean than it actually is. And it's getting to such a ludicrous point that we have these fictional oppression groups who are trying to claim like the new civil rights status. And the new one is fat liberationists, where they're not just saying, "Hey, listen, we think these clothing retail stores should offer us more lines of clothing or something that would be really benign and unobjectionable." They're saying, "No, we're proud of our fatness. We want fatness represented. We're the new civil rights group. We're fat liberationists. We want spaces unto ourselves, and we're part of this marginalized class." And this has sort of been percolating in academic circles where everything does percolate, right? All these weird behaviors, bizarre. The victim groups, they come from some bull session in a professor's study hall. And now we have Dove Soap, like there are corporate entities now, Dove Soap being the latest, sponsoring one girl to be their, I kid you not, their fat ambassador, right? Yeah, ambassador for fat people. And she's going out there and allowing space and allowing her voice to be centered to help other people share their fat liberation story. And they say, fat is not just a feminist issue. It's a racial issue. It's a it's a queer issue. When I grew up, saying queer was a slur, but now they say it themselves. But it's a queer issue. Okay, again, the victimization bowl of soup. So yeah, fat people. Apparently, fat liberationism, Lance, is the new oppression group in this long list of oppressive classes who have some slight against America.
All right, so you're saying two or three things that I think are worthy of note. The average person might let it drive past and miss it. One is that there's a machinery for this thing, and academia cooks up the grievances. And then the grievance industry, if it's got something that's marketable, then it goes to the oppression machinery, messaging machine. And then that's where you have the groups that make money off of victimization of a group. And then of course, it goes out from there into mobilizing and politicizing and using these things as wedge issues. And sometimes nefariously, they get lawsuits going and they shut things down. They do lawfare, or they get paid off because of fat shaming or something. But I want to zero in on this. Dove soap, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to know, Dove, you better clean up your act, because we're coming after Dove on this broadcast. Zahana Bryant, the ambassador for the obese, she's represented as a marginalized class, and you're saying here I just realized the irony of the terminology. She's throwing her weight behind the defund the police movement. She's thrown her weight behind Black Lives Matters. She's a big backer of racial preferences in college admissions. It seems to me that if the users of Dove soap, which I picture are people that are seeking a good, clean lifestyle, knew that Dove was behind BLM, defunding the police, racial quotas in colleges, I suspect that they would cringe if they thought it would reflect badly on their brand, don't you?
Yeah, but I think a lot of people in the marketing department, and we saw this with Bud Light, we see this with Target, is they think they have to embrace these woke policies in order to stay relevant. Whether they agree with them or not, it's sort of this corporate Fortune 500 mindset where they're the vanguards of progressivism, and they're just starting to, they get ahead of themselves because they start promoting stuff that their actual customers, like, wait a second, I'm not down with that. And there are now more alternatives. So you don't have to get Dove soap. You can get another brand of soap. But it's always interesting, Lance, is like this person, Ziana Bryant, talks about marginalized communities and they need their separate spaces. Why is it that all of these so-called progressive marginalized classes end up with their own corporate sponsorships? Why is that? They're so oppressed that you have Dove soap, you have Target, you have Bud Light, you have all these massively wealthy and name brand companies who are looking to line the pockets of the so-called marginalized classes. And that's because they're not actually marginal. They have great cultural influence and sway. And it's only to serve this larger ideological narrative to make Americans more suspicious of each other, to make them suspicious of Western traditions, to make them suspicious in particular of any Christian heritage that helped shape America. And that's why we have it's not just tearing down statues when we were dealing with that a few years ago. It was symbolic. It was not getting rid of a few Confederate statues that may have made people uncomfortable. It was, how can we get rid of not just these Confederate statues, which this lady Ziana Bryant was actually helping to spearhead as a college activist, but make it representative of tearing down American institutions and rebuilding them in a woke image. And that's what we have here. And it's like, we just can't get away from politics. And it's something that I know what I love about you is you impress upon Christians. It's like, listen, I know you probably want to stay out of politics. I know you probably want to stay out of these philosophical ideological warfare. But whether you like it or not, there is someone who's trying to force you into them and forcing you to take a stand. I think many of us are waking up to this point, hopefully, and saying, listen, we got to take a stand. There's plenty of opportunities to purchase other, we can't boycott every company, but there are companies that you can boycott and shame them into making more rational decisions. When I go through, it's like, Lance, conservatives never do this, right? When I'm going to get an oil change, I go to Jiffy Lube or whatever, I'm not expecting, a pro-life message, right? I'm not expecting the guy changing my oil to start lecturing me about any pro-life initiative or pro-abortion initiative. It's like, just change my oil. Like, Doug Soap, why are you lecturing me about fat liberation, whatever fat liberation is? Just sell me soap that's going to make me smell better and clean my body.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and then I love this here. What's happening? We got one writer for the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. I mean, we've gone from the NAACP to the NAAFP, fat people thing. What? It's as though Americans need to realize it's like what does Douglas Murray refer to it as? It's the Sir George the Knight phenomena, where he's going off in search of a dragon to slay, and after he slays the dragon, everybody expects him to do an act 2. So he goes forth and comes back with fictional stories because there's no more dragons. Yet once you've dealt with inequality in one generation, you have to make up stories in the next generation to keep the fiction alive. And I think people are catching up to it. To your point, I have not yet seen one brand ambassador for straight white Christian males. I haven't seen it yet. And nobody's paying for me, for instance, to be their brand. I have to pay for my own advertising, and I resent it because I've been using Dove soap for years, and now I'm going to change it to Irish Spring before we're done. How can people keep in touch with you, Jason?
Social media, all the main companies, Jason Mattera. Well, my website, jasonmattera.com, is a good place to start.
All right, jasonmattera.com. That's where we're going to go. We're going to start there, and we're going to come back with another interview in a moment. And I want to talk to you about your other devastating article and how, once again, you're exposing what's happening with, oh my gosh, Christians that are getting taken over by leftist marketing plans. All right, we'll be right back after this. Hey, let's take a moment right here and talk about something. You know, these programs are actually paid for by sponsors. And so the one thing that I always do is try to pick the sponsors that have the greatest value. Those are the ones that I myself believe in. Now, the Birch Gold Group is one of those key sponsors, and I'll tell you why. The economy is the area that I'm the most concerned about in terms of instability in the future. Do you know that right now, China and Russia and India is meeting with Saudi Arabians and South Africans to create an alternative economy, to basically crush the dollar? This is going to have a massive effect on the stock market, on real estate. It'll be a real shaking. But you don't have to be shaken, because there's a way you can protect your retirement, your 401ks, your IRAs, by connecting them in with gold. Gold is unique in history in that it's a place of stored value. In fact, those BRICS nations of Brazil and Russia, India and China, they're going to be backing themselves with, guess what? Gold. So be smart. I want you to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch and get a free information kit. Get knowledge. Act quickly. Don't wait. And they're going to be able to help you make a great decision on what to do. Remember, that information is free with no strings attached. Do it now. lancewallnau.com/Birch. Welcome back again. We have our acclaimed New York Times bestselling author, Jason Mattera, who writes some devastatingly cool articles. Where are these articles published, by the way, that I run into, Jason? Where do these come from? Is there one site?
Yeah, Standing for Freedom Center is a Christian news and opinion site for Liberty University. So Liberty University has sort of their own little think tank, and they publish these commentaries from a biblical worldview, news and commentary from a biblical perspective.
So who are the classic, who are the ones that are falling for the loving thy neighbor as thyself line, which can be expanded into tolerance of every bizarre behavior? I mean, basically, it's kind of like everything fits into loving your neighbor as yourself. I mean, if you're in Germany, if it wasn't post-war Germany, you could be loving your local Nazi. So where do you draw the line? Loving your local slave owner in the South, leading up to the Civil War. And we look at those things as absurdities, moral outrages. How can you even propose such an idea? But but in our own context of moral confusion, we're loving the perverse right now. And we're going to look back on it later as what were they thinking? Bring us up to date. Who are the people that are the most susceptible to this line of embracing every type of wokeism under the guise of Christian charity?
Yeah, and that's right. There's been a concerted effort over the last few years by these either outward progressive Christians, right, or those who are definitely liberal, but they don't have the guts to say that they're liberal. So they try to advocate their left-wing ideology, and they throw in the veneer of the gospel. So every single issue just so happens, whether it's open, like just a lawless immigration system, whether it's buying into the Biden administration's global warming, climate change agenda, whether it's getting an untested vaccine or masking up for who knows how long, all of this has been thrown under the same rug of, oh, we just got to love we got to do what Jesus said and love our neighbor. By the way, these same people, when you hear them use this phrase, love our neighbor, and we would agree we should love our neighbor, but always the question is, well, how and by which standard? But these same people who say to love your neighbor, and they then advocate a whole slew of left-wing policies, that love your neighbor line never manifests itself into loving, say, a member of the Proud Boys, right? He's never your neighbor. Or Donald Trump, he's never your neighbor. Or, they're always talking about white supremacy and racism. Oh, but somehow the race, no, can't love them. Oh no, but we got to embrace all these LGBTQIA plus whatever people, because love our neighbor, right? It's using this phrase as a cudgel to bully Christians into refusing to go along with the culture narrative. They say, no, you got to go along with it because we have to love our neighbor, and they never define it. They never, as Christians, we have to look at, okay, you want to say love our neighbor? Well, how is it defined biblically? And yet they never get to that point, because if you define love your neighbor, whether it's starting in the Old Testament, going to the New Testament, it's always defined through the lens of the law of God. And they don't like talking about that, liberal Christians, because it gets them a little skittish.
Well, you made an interesting point. The loving the neighbor is never extended to loving your local MAGA, enthusiast. Like you said, you're a Donald Trump person. But it's an act of loving. And so, but you make the point here, wouldn't it be an act of love to our neighbor to secure the border in order to stop the invitation for human trafficking, for the abduction of children and women, for the raping of women, for the fentanyl overdose, for the creation and curation of gangs in the United States, which are going to be coming over the border, or terrorists? Isn't it also love? In other words, you're making the point that it's a one-sided kind of naive, stupid love that is opening the door to the devil, and not closing the door to the devil, because that's also an act of love, to lock the devil out, to bind, to say no. What is it? A cool verse in Titus, I think, is it where the Apostle Paul says, there's a godliness that teaches us to say no. Saying no is something which is also a godly attribute. But who are the churches that are the most susceptible to this? Are these mainline Protestant churches, or do you see this species of strange thing? I saw it happening with the BLM riots. I mean, I saw all kinds of Christians, evangelicals, kind of flag wave out there and saying, well, we love you, we're for you. They're not even realizing it's a Marxist organization takeover of the United States and an assault on marriage as defined by Christians. It strikes me just so bizarre.
Yeah, I think largely all Christian denominations could be susceptible to this line of argumentation, but I think you hit on it. It's a lazy form of arguing to say, look, because you can make in fact, they hit the wires today. In Minnesota, there was a group of illegal aliens that were arrested because they had kidnapped 11-year-old girls and were raping them in a room for days. One of them happened to escape, and she got the authorities. This is a rape, and that should have never happened, because these people should have never been in this country. The fentanyl overdoses that are coming over the border are fentanyl overdoses that should never have happened, because we have a lawless, porous border that the Biden administration refuses to secure. So how is it not loving your neighbor to have an orderly immigration process, to know who is coming in, who is leaving, to making sure that communities actually have the resources? I mean, you go to New York City today, and even Mayor Adams, you have Kathy Hochul now saying, we can't, we got to change our laws. Anyone just can't come in here. They're seeing their sanctuary status up close, what it means, and they're saying, no, things have to change. So how is it a loving your neighbor when you're overloading the medical medical community. You're overloading the school system. You're overburdening neighborhoods that don't have the resources. It's not loving your neighbor. What gets me so annoyed, Lance, is you have groups like National Evangelical Association. They're one of the big people pushing this love your neighbor line for open borders. They're pushing it for adopting Biden's climate change agenda and saying, we got to love our neighbor around the globe, and we got to curtail fossil fuels, and we got to adopt all these mandates that are being promoted by these elites. Elites in government. Okay, what about loving your neighbor, especially your lower income neighbor, to make sure he's not paying through the nose at the gasoline tank, at the gasoline pump, or making sure that he can afford a car and not having to be stuck trying to drive a car that's electric vehicle that's out of his reach? You're not loving your neighbor? Or are you loving your neighbor around the world, who is forced to actually mine for these rare minerals? Are you loving the earth by this mining that is actually very deleterious for the environment? So it always cuts both ways with loving your neighbor. That's why it's important for Christians to say, all right, Paul, ask a few questions on it. What do you mean by loving your neighbor? By what standard are you loving your neighbor? And can you show me actually biblical support that what you're saying is grounded in God's word?
Yeah, to your point, I just came back from talking to 100 or so nations in Jerusalem. I was down there for one of the Jewish feasts, and all the Christian nations come in for Feast of Tabernacles. And one of the big sticking points there is the Arab nations find our arrogance in imposing our LGBTQ loving, our neighbor philosophy on them, whether they like it or not. They have got to fly our flag and kiss our queer ideology. Now, nothing is more calculated to raise up the animosity and almost militant outrage of another nation than to dishonor your neighbor's religion and culture by forcing them to have to submit to your culture. This is the essence of arrogance. The ambassadors of various nations I talked to said their biggest claim to Christian integrity was refusing to fly our LGBT flag on their embassies, even though they were told they would not get money from the United States if we didn't export our ideology. So Christian nations and Muslim nations are not being loved. These are our neighbors by our arrogant export model of American wokeism, which we impose on all these other countries and render ourselves odious and offensive to them, because it's the exact opposite of tolerance and inclusion. It's forcing other people to have to convert to our faith, which is the danger of a woke Christianity. It stops being militant about its own beliefs, and in accommodating the left, it creates a dangerous vacuum where they actually go out and evangelize their values, because it's almost like a counterfeit religion. And Christianity Today wrote about Anthony, about the lyrics, this song about Richmond, north of Richmond. I didn't know that until you told me that. Tell me what in the world's wrong? What's going on with Christianity Today?
Yeah. I don't. Well, Russell Moore is the editor, so there's a lot going wrong with Christianity Today, and it's they are representative of Christians who will never punch left. They always punch right, and they coddle the left because they want to have a growing influence amongst the cultural elites, and they actually look down at the left and at the right. And here's a great example. So this song, Richmond, North of Richmond, hit the charts, went gangbusters. And the guy makes a valid point about chastising the Richmond, North of Richmond, the DC elites who raise people's taxes and then use those taxes to subsidize inefficient and ineffective welfare programs where welfare fraud is a real thing. You're paying people, we see paying people not to work at all. And here's Christianity Today, rather than recognizing this zeitgeist that this individual, this artist tapped into, they go ahead and lecture him, saying that he's giving negative caricatures about welfare recipients, and that if we have his song doesn't actually love our neighbor on welfare, doesn't love our neighbor on welfare. So basically, if you love your neighbor, you have to defend the welfare state. The welfare state, by the way, that has entrenched generational poverty, that has decimated communities, especially Black families and Hispanic families, by removing the father from the household, and has engineered them in a way to be living on government sustenance and actually living the freedom of what their hands produce. And then you have to look at it by, wait a second, is the welfare state even biblical Christianity today?
Well, and
it's not.
And it's a shame that these subjects, which used to actually be part of a debate politically, are now just grandfathered in. I think the Republicans are afraid to even touch the subject. We've lost the ability to even have the objective conversation about the destruction of people that are in poverty, because we make them dependent and force them into a form of slavery that they can't get out of. We work with single moms all the time, my wife and I, and we help furnish families, here in Texas. And one of the biggest problems we have is the moment we get them jobs, the government punishes them by taking them off of the whether it's Medicaid or food stamps, which is, so the moment they demonstrate they're willing to work, if they're not making enough to make it, but they're trying, the government incentivizes them to get the heck out of a job. What are you doing? You're leaving us? It's like a jilted lover. Anyway, we're running out of time. This always happens to me. Jason, how can people keep in touch with you? Where do they go to find out more from Jason Mattera? How do they do that?
The website is jasonmattera.com, and they'll have access to all my videos, articles, and social media handles there.
Excellent. Once again, the website where you get your articles posted is called
standingforfreedomcenter.org.
Standing for Freedom. Jason, it's always good to see you. Thank God we have young hope for the future, ladies and gentlemen. There's another generation out there other than us that actually sees what's happening. Only takes a few of them, and only takes a spark to get a fire going. All right. Hey, I love you guys. Let me remind you that while we're on a tear here for good projects and good products, I am out to stop these woke corporations. You want to go to lancewallnau.com/publicsq, because I want us to be able to only do business with those people that share our values. I'm tired of giving my money to people that are using my money against me. If you've got a business, put your business on this app so we can support you. This is the plan. We're going to help each other. We're going to work around these woke corporations. Go to lancewallnau.com, Public Square, Public SQ. This app is taking everybody by storm. Donald Trump Jr. is pushing it. Turning Point is pushing it. I want you to know about it. lancewallnau.com, Public Square is the key, and we're going to see you again. God bless.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.